The story begins with the shadows of internal conflict flicker across the mind of Princess Estelle as she grapples with the weight of protection and the looming presence of the demon tribe. She stands within an opulent, high-ceilinged chamber of the kingdom of Hazelbart, where the sunlight filters through tall, arched windows, casting long shadows over the ornate furniture and delicate drapery. A heavy sigh escapes her as she contemplates the brutal reality of her royal lineage. To think that she must surrender her body to the sovereign of a hostile nation feels like a crushing weight. She recognizes that her primary function is to serve as a vessel for peace, bearing a child to bridge the chasm between two warring races. To the man she is destined to marry, she views herself as nothing more than a strategic asset in a cold, political transaction. Yet, despite this grim outlook, she forces herself to understand the gravity of her role. Memory tugs at her, recalling a moment of academic curiosity where she questioned the biological possibility of a union between a human and a demon. Pain blossoms in her chest, a physical manifestation of her emotional turmoil, as her eyes well with unshed tears. The history of her world is one of forced coexistence between humans and demonkind, a relationship that has endured since ancient times. While humans flourished on the fertile flatlands, building bustling towns and villages, demonkind remained secluded within the dense shadows of forests and the jagged peaks of mountainous regions. This geographical divide did not prevent the eruption of large-scale wars fueled by the pursuit of prosperity and territorial disputes. Through centuries of bloodshed, humanity arrived at a singular, bitter conclusion. Demonkind is the ultimate enemy, an entity to be loathed. The narrative shifts back in time to the kingdom of Hazelbart, where the royal court is thrown into a state of frantic disbelief. Word spreads through the marble halls that a representative of the enemy has requested an audience. Guards stand at attention, their hands gripping the hilts of their swords as they warn that the nation cannot afford to let its guard down. The shock deepens when the identity of the visitor is revealed to be the Demon King himself. Within the throne room, First Prince Clement and First Princess Estelle wait with bated breath. Clement, a youth with light, ruffled hair, looks on with a mixture of fear and confusion, while Estelle maintains a stoic front despite the chaos. Queen Katerina sweeps into the room, her presence commanding and cold. She immediately targets Estelle, mocking the princess for her disheveled appearance and suggesting her hair is sticking up because she was once again participating in combat training. Percy, the captain of the Royal Guard and Estelle's childhood friend, stands as a silent sentinel. He offers a reassuring nod to Estelle, vowing to protect the king with his life. The queen's sharp gaze returns to Estelle, demanding she finally learn to understand her position, labeling her behavior as uncivilized. The doors swing open to reveal Gil, the king of the demon tribe. He carries himself with a terrifyingly calm demeanor, offering a polite greeting that belies the historical enmity between their peoples. He urges the court to proceed with seriousness, noting that the day's events will likely be etched into the annals of history. King Cedric of Hazelbart, seated upon his ornate throne, acknowledges the gathering, his face etched with the weariness of a man who has led a nation through constant strife. Estelle observes the Demon King closely, noting with a start that he does not look significantly different from a human. She shivers, realizing that no human who has seen his true form has ever returned to tell the tale. Cedric, cutting through the formalities, demands to know the reason Gil has ventured so deep into enemy territory. This man is the absolute ruler of all demonkind, a figure of mythic terror standing in the heart of the human capital. Gil's response is a bombshell. He proposes a ceasefire. A collective gasp ripples through the human assembly. Cedric demands to know the meaning of this sudden overture, but Gil clarifies that the ceasefire is merely a byproduct of his true goal. He explains that the endless battles have been largely due to the blurred borders of their respective territories. Originally, humans and demons lived in separate lands, but encroachment has led to perpetual conflict. He proposes a complete reevaluation and establishment of clear borders. From this point forward, access to each other's lands will be strictly restricted. Any trespasser caught without permission will face predetermined and severe punishment. Cedric strokes his beard, contemplating the offer. He admits that a prolonged war benefits neither side and only leads to a continuous stream of casualties for both humans and demons. Gil emphasizes that his proposal is an excellent opportunity for peace. However, the human king remains skeptical, questioning why the demon king would propose such a convenient and one-sided idea. He reminds the court of the atrocities the demons have committed against humanity in the past, asserting that they cannot easily enter into an agreement with such monsters. Queen Katerina interjects, her eyes gleaming with a hidden agenda. She argues that the proposal could be framed as a favorable deal for their nation. She suggests that they can treat this plan as a great achievement of Hazelbart. Moving with predatory grace, she calls Prince Clement to her side. She envisions a future where humans and demons are completely separated under Hazelbart's efforts. To secure this peace in the eyes of the public, she proposes a fabrication. They will announce that Prince Clement set out to the battlefield and succeeded in defeating the Demon King. He will be hailed as a hero who brought a future without conflict to the human territories. Cedric is appalled by the suggestion, questioning what would happen if such a blatant lie came to light. He points out the absurdity of claiming the Demon King is defeated while the man is still very much alive. Katerina dismisses his concerns, noting that with the borders reorganized and sealed, no information from the demon lands will ever reach human ears. She describes it as a heroic-sounding story necessary for their political future. The stress of the negotiation and the Queen's manipulation takes a physical toll on Cedric. He gasps, clutching his chest as he collapses. Estelle and Percy rush to his side, their faces filled with alarm. Katerina, however, remains unmoved, advising the king not to raise his voice as it is bad for his declining health. She whispers that she is doing this for his own sake and for the sake of Hazelbart's continued position as a leading nation. She pressures the ailing king to make the decision for the sake of a better future for the world. Turning her attention to King Gil, the queen acknowledges that any agreement must be mutual and include a disadvantage for the other side. She asks if he wants the agreement to succeed badly enough to accept a final condition. Gil eyes her warily as she unveils her true intent. To ensure the deal is mutual, she offers her beloved daughter, First Princess Estelle, to the Demon King. Estelle recoils in horror, realizing she is being offered as a hostage. Katerina smiles behind her fan, claiming hostage is such an unpleasant word and that Estelle should think of it as a prestigious political marriage. She tells the stunned princess that as a woman born into royalty, she should take pride in being a piece in such a grand negotiation. Estelle's heart sinks as she realizes the depth of the queen's malice. Since her mother passed away and Katerina became the new queen, she has been a constant target of the woman's cruelty. This marriage isn't about peace for the queen, it's a way to permanently discard the stepdaughter she loathes. Gil asks if these are indeed all the terms, his expression unreadable. Estelle tries to object, pleading with her father not to let them decide her fate on their own, but the room remains silent. Gil accepts the terms, formally agreeing to take the Princess of Hazelbart as his bride. In the aftermath, Estelle reflects on the gravity of the situation. Her actions will now shape the future of her nation and all of humanity. Percy finds her later, expressing his own disbelief at the Demon King's intentions and the Queen's forceful tactics. He notes that Katerina has been acting as if she holds all the power simply because the King's health has failed. He reminds Estelle that Hazelbart's current prosperity is due to her father's strength, not the Queen's schemes. He urges her to go to her father and tell him her true feelings, believing the king would not stay silent if he knew her heart was breaking. However, Estelle has made a different choice. She asks Percy to promise her one thing: to protect the country and her father even after she is gone. She knows the royal guard is top class and trusts Percy to support them. Percy, realizing her resolve, tries to encourage her in his own way, reminding her of her own bravery and how she always said she would rather fight for her country with a sword than be married off to an unknown king. Estelle thanks him, tearfully admitting that his encouragement gives her the strength to move forward. If marrying the Demon King can save her country and the future of humanity, she will embrace the role of a hero in her own way. A secret deal is struck between the Demon King and the Kingdom of Hazelbart. The Queen's fabricated story of Clement's victory proceeds as if it were the absolute truth, and peaceful days seemingly return to the human lands. In a quiet room, the marriage contract is signed in secret. Gil notices Estelle's hand trembling as she holds the quill. He asks if she is scared, but she coldly replies that she was simply lost in the emotion of leaving her homeland and that she is not fragile. Gil matches her coldness, stating that he holds no feelings for her whatsoever and likely never will. He reiterates that the marriage is solely for the benefit of their two races and she is nothing more than a piece in the negotiation. Estelle agrees, noting that the sentiment goes for both of them. The journey to the demon lands begins. Estelle finds herself transported via a wyvern, marveling at how the creature flies through the sky with such ease. Upon arrival at the demon palace, she is greeted by monstrous attendants. One demon, a creature with feline features, whispers to a bird-like companion about Estelle's cold reaction, only for Estelle to sharply inform them that she can hear them. She is led through the dark, Gothic corridors of the palace, where she is told that Lord Gil is awaiting her. Standing before the heavy doors of the Demon King's inner sanctum, Estelle steels her heart. She reminds herself that there is no way she can let her guard down in a place full of demons who have slaughtered countless humans. She has made up her mind. She will not look back and she will not be afraid anymore. She enters the room to present herself to Gil. As the bride to the Demon King, she will live on within the heart of the demon tribe for the sake of her people. The streets of the human territories surge with a newfound, vibrant energy as the shadow of war recedes into memory. In the bustling markets of the Hazelbart Kingdom, merchants cry out their wares while travelers navigate through dense, cheerful crowds. This resurgence of trade and public activity stems from a singular, collective belief: the demon tribe no longer poses a threat. Townspeople exchange smiles under strings of festive penance, openly attributing this era of tranquility to the triumph of Prince Clement, the celebrated hero. Peace manifests as a tangible, wonderful weight upon the capital, encouraging the populace to engage with the world more actively than they have in generations. Within the gilded confines of the royal palace, Queen Katerina observes this prosperity with a sharp, calculating satisfaction. She notes that the alliance has secured Hazelbart's reputation as the preeminent leading nation among all human territories. While she basks in this political victory, Prince Clement prepares for sword training, though his outward confidence masks a hidden fragility. He boasts of his role as the hero while signaling to Percy, his childhood friend and captain, to begin their session. However, the physical reality of his heroism is far less impressive. He quickly succumbs to shortness of breath and retreats to his room, nursing a throbbing right shoulder. He desperately rationalizes his lack of skill, convincing himself that in a peaceful world, actual combat prowess is unnecessary. He fears the disastrous consequences should the public discover that his strength is merely a carefully maintained bluff. While the prince hides his inadequacy, a heavier gloom permeates the king's private quarters. King Cedric's health declines steadily, his face etched with exhaustion and worry. Despite the public celebration, he remains deeply troubled by the current political climate and the sacrifice of his daughter. Percy stands in the shadows of the palace corridors, sighing as he reflects on the king's worsening state and the rising influence of Queen Katerina. The queen has successfully leveraged the ceasefire to gain the unwavering support of the most influential nobles, further solidifying her grip on the throne. In the quiet moments of his watch, Percy's thoughts drift to the absent princess, whispering her name as he acknowledges the void her departure has left in the heart of the country. Meanwhile, deep within the demon tribe's nation of Wilhelm, the atmosphere is one of rigorous, bureaucratic discipline. Demon King Gil stands amidst towering stacks of parchment in a grand library, his eyes scanning documents with a focus that rivals any human scholar. He demands thorough examinations of written testimonies and urges his delegates to hurry, as a formal objection has been filed regarding a pressing case. Unlike the savage caricatures imagined by humans, the demon leadership functions with a complex political structure. Estelle enters this space, her expression a mix of trepidation and curiosity as she observes the Demon King's tireless work ethic. Gil abruptly sets aside his paperwork to lead Estelle on an inspection of a remote village. They arrive at a rustic settlement where the architecture of half-timbered houses mirrors the villages of Estelle's own homeland. Large, wolf-like demons with glowing eyes greet their king with enthusiastic, albeit startling, loyalty. Gil explains his presence there. He has come to reinvestigate a case of plundering and murder, personally enforcing the laws of his land. Estelle recoils in shock, struggling to reconcile the image of a bloodthirsty tyrant with the man currently functioning as a security official to keep troublesome demons in check. The inspection takes an unexpected emotional turn when a demon child approaches Estelle. The child picks up a handkerchief she had dropped, but before the interaction can deepen, a larger demon with moose-like antlers snatches the child away. The demon glares at Estelle with palpable fear, warning the child that the human woman is dangerous. This reversal of perspective strikes Estelle with the force of a physical blow. She realizes that to the common demon, humans are the savage, unpredictable monsters. Later, as they sit in a dimly lit demon tavern, Gil observes Estelle's shaken demeanor. He speaks with a blunt, weary honesty, noting that demons generally view humans as arrogant, prideful creatures who kill without hesitation. He shatters her lifelong prejudices by revealing that the demons who raid human lands and cause trouble are merely a violent minority. Most demons live quiet, normal lives within their own borders, despising the war just as much as any human peasant. Estelle's eyes widen as she grapples with the truth. Her hatred had been directed at an entire race based on the actions of a few. Gil leans back, his gaze distant as he recalls his own youth spent on the battlefield. He confesses that he once fought without question, but the endless cycle of death eventually revealed the utter futility of war. This profound weariness was the true catalyst for his ceasefire proposal. He vows that if he must fight again, it will only be to protect his people, and he will do whatever is necessary to ensure their survival. The conversation shifts to the political maneuvers surrounding their union. Gil inquires how the human lands handled the secret of their marriage. Estelle admits that the queen has already manipulated the narrative, announcing to the public that she was simply married off to a king of a distant, unnamed country. She acknowledges with a bitter pang that she has already been forgotten by her people, who are far too occupied celebrating their hero to spare a thought for a discarded princess. Gil recognizes the queen's calculated efficiency, realizing she had planned this erasure before the ink on the treaty was dry. Back at the palace in Wilhelm, Gil introduces Millie, a demon made with delicate, insect-like wings. Millie is energetic and helpful, though her pushy nature initially overwhelms Estelle. Estelle finds herself dizzy at the sheer diversity of demon types she encounters daily. However, even the cheerful Millie harbors her own fears. Estelle discovers the maid weeping one afternoon. Millie distraughtly apologizes for missing a single wrinkle while changing the bedsheets, terrified that she had failed her new queen. Estelle gently comforts her, moved by the maid's dedication and surprised to find herself smiling for the first time in a long while. As night falls over the castle, Estelle sits alone on a plush sofa, her mind spiraling into the dark uncertainties of her future. Surrounded entirely by demons and cut off from her kin, she struggles to maintain her composure. Her internal monologues are interrupted when she notices a light still burning in Gil's study. She enters to find him still working late into the night. Gil looks up, his expression softening as he notices her exhaustion. He warns her that she will wear her body out if she continues to forego sleep. In a sudden, authoritative movement, Gil sweeps Estelle into his arms and carries her toward her bedroom. Estelle gasps in surprise, asking where they are going, only for him to deposit her onto her bed. He looks at her with a piercing intensity, commanding her to take off her clothes and change into pajamas so she can finally rest. He confronts her misery, asking if she feels like her life is in constant danger among demons she cannot trust. He challenges her resolve, wondering if she is merely scared, lonely, and missing her home. Estelle's defenses crumble, and she begins to weep, admitting that her heart often fails to keep up with the demands of her station. However, she fiercely asserts her identity as the second princess of Hazelbart. She declares that she did not come to this land with half-hearted feelings and that she is prepared to accept everything in front of her, no matter how painful or unpleasant it may be. Gil's response is quiet and unexpected. He tells her to stop mocking herself and to simply go to sleep. He lies down beside her on the bed, announcing that the mood is ruined and he will simply sleep there like that. Estelle lies in the dark, startled by his presence but finding a strange comfort in the sound of his steady breathing. They lie back to back, his skin barely touching hers, yet the weight of his presence fills the room. The next morning, gossip ripples through the palace as Millie discovers the Demon King spent the night in the princess's quarters. Millie observes that the marriage must be a heavy burden for Estelle, noting that the woman has looked gloomier with each passing day. She suggests to Gil that it wouldn't be surprising if the princess were already considering a divorce. Gil stops in his tracks, his voice dropping to a low, confident growl. He asserts that there will be no divorce and that he has absolutely no intention of separating from her. He abruptly ends the idle talk, dismissing Millie and returning to the endless work of his kingdom. The queen sits alone upon a massive, ornate bed, her gaze drifting toward the soft morning light as she reflects on the first peaceful sleep she has experienced since arriving in this foreign land. She traces the memories of the previous night, recognizing that the tranquility she felt stemmed entirely from the presence of the man who stayed by her side, allowing her mind to finally release its hold on unnecessary worries. Sunlight spills across the lavish chamber, highlighting the intricate carvings of the headboard as Estelle ponders the shifting nature of her relationship with the Demon King, Gil. The quiet of the morning is soon interrupted by a wide yawn, which is immediately noticed by her maid, Millie, who approaches with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Millie questions if the queen is sleep-deprived, but Estelle quickly clarifies that despite the late hour, she actually slept remarkably well. The queen's eyes flicker with a hidden embarrassment as she asks when the king departed, only to learn from Millie that Gil was already attending to his official duties after a chance greeting in the corridor earlier that morning. Estelle recoils slightly at the realization that her maid saw him leaving her private quarters, and her face flushes as she remembers how she had suddenly succumbed to tears and outbursts the night before. She assumes Gil only stayed out of a sense of obligation or kindness triggered by her vulnerability, yet the thought of him being so close causes a visible tremor of shyness to wash over her. Millie watches her mistress closely, eventually admitting a sense of relief. She confesses that while the marriage was originally presented as a mere political transaction between humans and demons, she had feared for the burden Estelle would carry alone in enemy territory. The maid's tone softens as she observes what she perceives to be the steady growth of love between the queen and the demon king, noting that Gil's actions seem increasingly focused on Estelle's well-being. Estelle stammers a frantic denial, her heart racing as she realizes that the entire palace likely assumes they are already building a future together, perhaps even expecting an heir. This thought brings the weight of political reality crashing back down, as she considers how in the human world, marriages of state and the production of successors are inseparable. She wonders if the same cold logic applies to demons, her mind swirling with the logistical and biological questions of such a union. Sensing the queen's mounting anxiety and her struggle with insomnia, Millie offers a practical suggestion, mentioning a plant known as sleeping herb that grows in the Osmo forest to the east of the palace. The maid describes the herb's ability to soothe the mind and relieve the stresses of the spirit, encouraging the queen to venture out and retrieve some for herself. Millie assures her that as the queen of the kingdom, Estelle requires no special permission to enter the restricted forest and that no dangerous demons reside there who would harm a human. Empowered by this advice and a desire to clear her head, Estelle thanks her maid and prepares to depart immediately. She recalls seeing the dense tree lean from her window and decides that taking action is far better than remaining trapped in her own endless thoughts. As she makes her way toward the forest, she unexpectedly crosses paths with Gil in a quiet hallway. The air between them thickens with a lingering tension from their previous encounter. Estelle immediately begins to apologize for her display of weakness and her tears, her eyes downcast as she struggles to meet his gaze. However, Gil surprises her by speaking first, his voice carrying a note of genuine remorse. He admits that he spoke too harshly the night before and failed to offer the comfort she clearly needed in her moment of pain. He clarifies that he never intended to take her resolve lightly, and he asks for her forgiveness for his lack of consideration. The queen freezes, her eyes widening in shock at the king's humility. The formality of his apology feels alien to her, yet it is followed by an even more significant shift in his demeanor. Gil discards his respectful, distant tone for a more casual manner of speech, insisting that she simply call him Gil and stop referring to him with such stiff titles. He admits that such formality does not suit him and only serves to make the situation more suspicious. Estelle feels a strange, ticklish sensation in her chest as she hears him speak her name without the weight of royal protocol. They share a brief, normal conversation that leaves her feeling lighter, even as she continues her journey toward the Osmo forest. She reflects on how little she truly knows about this man, finding herself increasingly drawn to the unexpected sides of his personality that he has begun to reveal. As she enters the shadow of the ancient trees, the queen begins her search for the herb Millie described, wandering deeper into the foliage when the initial areas prove fruitless. The forest is quiet, yet the atmosphere shifts abruptly as a massive, hulking shadow looms behind her. A grotesque, horned demon with glowing eyes and massive tusks emerges from the brush, his presence radiating a palpable malice. The creature sneers at the sight of a human woman in such a place, his voice dripping with venom as he identifies her as Gil's woman. Estelle recoils in terror, realizing too late that she has wandered into a trap. This demon is not a peaceful inhabitant but a criminal who has been imprisoned within the forest's restricted bounds. He voices a deep-seated hatred for Gil, mocking the dumb deals the king has made with humans and expressing his desire to use the queen as a tool for his own amusement and revenge. The troll lunges forward, his massive hands pinning Estelle to the ground as he revels in the look of prideful terror on her face. He calculates that simply killing her would not be a sufficient jab at the demon king. He intends to make her suffer to truly strike at his rival. Estelle cries out for help, her voice echoing through the trees as she realizes the futility of her situation. Meanwhile, back at the palace, chaos erupts as the staff discovers the queen is missing. Gil arrives on the scene, demanding a full explanation as his advisors speculate wildly about her disappearance, some even suggesting she might have fled or taken her own life out of homesickness. Millie, trembling with guilt, reveals that she suggested the Queen visit the Osmo forest. Gil's expression hardens into one of pure fury and alarm as he explains the true nature of the forest. It is a prison where the most dangerous and human-hating criminal demons are kept under lock and key. Without a second thought, Gil commands his guards to prepare as he sprints toward the forest. He arrives just as the troll is about to deal a devastating blow to the Queen. A sudden, violent explosion of dark energy erupts, blasting the monster away from Estelle. The king stands before her, a silent and terrifying protector, as his soldiers swarm the area to capture the reeling criminal. The troll snarls about Gil always being an eyesore and getting in his way, but the king ignores the creature's taunts, his focus entirely on the trembling woman at his feet. He reaches down, his touch surprisingly steady as he asks if she can stand, eventually hoisting her into a protective embrace when she proves too weak to find her footing. As they begin the walk back to the palace, the adrenaline begins to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp reality. Gil's voice returns to its stoic, detached tone as he informs her that it would be a problem if something happened to her, simply because she is a crucial piece in the deal made with the humans. The words pierce Estelle more deeply than any physical wound could, and she feels her heart rate spike with a different kind of pain. She questions him, her voice trembling as she asks if she is truly nothing more than a hostage to him, and if his worry is merely a concern for his political investment. She vows to fulfill her responsibility as a member of the demon race through this marriage, but the coldness of his explanation leaves her reeling. However, as they reach the palace gates, Gil casts a final, enigmatic glance her way. He admits that her safety is indeed an immense benefit, but then adds a final, startling thought. He is genuinely curious to see if it is possible for a demon and a human to conceive a child together. Estelle is left in a state of stunned silence, the weight of his curiosity lingering in the air as she realizes the true depth and complexity of the union she has entered. The Demon King, Gil, stands amidst the silent grandeur of his palace, grappling with a sudden deviation from his usual calculated stoicism. He reflects on a moment of uncharacteristic impulse where he embraced the human princess, Estelle, ignoring the political and personal ramifications of such a gesture. He questions the sincerity of the words he spoke regarding the benefits of their arrangement, feeling as though he had overstepped a boundary he himself established. As the moonlight filters through the high windows, he acknowledges that this display of affection was entirely unlike his usual self, yet the memory of her presence lingers. He contemplates the consequences of his actions, wondering if his attempt to comfort her has fundamentally altered the nature of their transaction. In a starker room adorned with a large clock and classical moldings, a member of the security unit, a beast man with leopard-like markings and pointed ears, provides a formal report. He stands with a disciplined posture while delivering the confession of Millie, the former head maid. Millie, who had served the palace with distinction for many years, had admitted during an interrogation to harboring a deep-seated resentment toward humans. This bitterness drove her to lure the Queen into a trap with false promises, ultimately attempting to take her life. Gil absorbs this information with a somber expression, his gaze fixed on the floor as he processes the betrayal of a longtime servant. The guard notes that Millie has been transferred to a secure unit pending her punishment, her confession serving as the trigger for the current security alert. The conversation deepens as the guard reveals that Millie has chosen to remain silent regarding the specific details of her grudge. Gil's face is shown in a tight close-up, his dark hair falling over his eyes as he reflects on the troublesome nature of emotions. He decides that he must see her face one last time, instructing the guard to handle the remaining administrative duties. The silhouette of the two figures against the large windows emphasizes the weight of the situation. Gil moves through the palace halls, his thoughts drifting back to the origin of his marriage proposal. The narrative shifts into the territory of memory, revisiting the arrival of the human princess. Gil initially viewed Estelle as a mere instrument in a high-stakes transaction, a proud and dignified figure who would fulfill her role without complaint or weakness. He anticipated a smooth progression of their deal, expecting her to remain stoic and tearless. However, the reality shattered his expectations. He recalls finding her in a state of complete emotional collapse, as if a vital thread holding her together had snapped. Instead of the dignified princess, he saw a vulnerable child crying herself to sleep out of sheer exhaustion. This sight fundamentally altered his perception, making it impossible for him to view her as just a convenient piece in a political game. Gil realizes that he cannot simply leave her to struggle alone. He observes her efforts to adapt to the demon realm in her own unique way and decides to offer a small concession, allowing her the familiarity of using his name, Gil, without formal titles. Yet, even as he shows this consideration, the burden of his position weighs heavily on him. Back in his office, surrounded by his advisors, a horned demon and a three-eyed deer-like beastman, he attempts to refocus his mind. He tells himself not to dwell on her any further, reinforcing the idea that his primary duty is to protect the future of the demon race. He tries to convince himself that the marriage was a cold necessity, a purpose-driven transaction, and nothing more. In the cold, brick-lined depths of the underground dungeon, Estelle stands before the iron bars of Millie's cell. The contrast between Estelle's ornate, lace-trimmed gown and the grim surroundings is stark. Millie, appearing disheveled with her moth-like wings drooping, looks up with a mixture of mockery and resignation. She questions if Estelle has come to gloat or to see the face of the girl who disgraced herself. Estelle, however, offers compassion instead of condemnation. She expresses her intent to speak to Gil on Millie's behalf, hoping to lessen the severity of the sentence. Millie recoils at this kindness, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and fury. Estelle insists that she cannot believe Millie would act without a reason, recalling how Millie was the only person who smiled at her when she felt completely alone in the palace. The tension in the dungeon reaches a breaking point as Millie finally erupts. She shouts that Estelle understands nothing of her feelings. She reveals that her resentment was birthed from a secret, unrequited love for the Demon King. Gil had always been a figure of high standing who kept his distance from women, and Millie had found contentment simply serving by his side. That fragile peace was destroyed the moment Estelle appeared as his bride. Millie admits that the human she truly resented was Estelle herself. Her tiny feelings, never meant to be realized, were crushed by the reality of the marriage. She lashes out at Estelle, demanding that she stop her attempts to understand her heart. A guard with large antlers arrives to initiate Millie's transfer. As the cell door is prepared, Millie turns a cold gaze toward Estelle, telling her to stop her attempts at comfort. She claims that Estelle's kindness only makes her feel more empty. She urges the princess to simply go ahead and hate her, reinforcing the idea that the marriage is nothing but a transaction and that there are no special feelings involved between her and the king. Estelle stands frozen, her eyes wide as she processes the depth of the maid's pain and the harsh reality of her own position. She watches as Millie is led away, the clinking of chains echoing in the damp corridor. The scene transitions to the training grounds, where the air is thick with the sound of a blade slicing through the wind. Gil is alone, engaged in a vigorous sword routine. His movements are sharp and aggressive as he tries to purge the troublesome influence of emotions from his mind. He views feelings as a force that destroys composure and creates chaos for everyone involved. He strikes out at the air, his face set in a grim mask of determination, repeatedly telling himself that the status quo, the cold, transactional nature of his life, is fine. He executes a series of complex maneuvers, the sword a blur of steel in the dim light of the training hall. The solitude of his training is interrupted when Estelle approaches him from behind. She teases the ever-vigilant Demon King for allowing someone to get so behind him unnoticed. Gil is visibly startled, his composure momentarily faltering as he looks at her. She mentions the events of the previous night and suggests a sparring match, noting that if there was a training ground available within the estate, she should have been told sooner. She explains that in her homeland, she was often disparaged as a beast girl or a wild child because she preferred the sword over princess-like duties. She admits that while she finds wielding a blade more enjoyable, the insults still stung her heart. As they spar, the clashing of their wooden swords creates a rhythmic percussion. In a moment of stillness, Gil looks at her intently and blurts out that she is beautiful. The word hangs in the air, catching both of them off guard. Estelle freezes, her eyes wide with shock, her mouth slightly agape as she absorbs the compliment. Realizing what he has said, Gil immediately recoils, his hand flying to his face in a gesture of absolute embarrassment. Estelle quickly recovers and uses his lapse in concentration to land a strike, declaring her victory. She laughs, accusing him of using a weird line as a tactical distraction to throw her off her stance. The awkwardness dissolves into a rare moment of genuine shared laughter. Gil watches her, noting how her unfiltered and honest nature has a way of pulling him along, making it increasingly difficult for him to maintain his stoic facade. He observes the busy nature of her emotions, how she can transition from crying to laughing in such a short span of time. He recognizes that she possesses a quality he lacks, an unfiltered, honest heart that stirs up his own carefully ordered world. He finds himself unable to maintain his composure in the face of her genuine joy. The atmosphere softens as they sit together on the edge of the training floor. Estelle senses that something is still troubling him and encourages him not to keep his worries to himself. She acknowledges that while she may be a pawn in their political deal, she still takes her role as his wife seriously. She asks if there is anything she can do to help him bear his burdens. Gil looks at her, the usual hardness in his eyes replaced by something more contemplative. He eventually tells her that no help is needed, and that she should simply stay exactly the way she is, unfiltered and honest. The narrative abruptly shifts across the borders into the human territory of Hazelbart. The atmosphere here is one of panic and despair. In a lavishly appointed royal bedroom, several men in military attire and a young boy named Percy stand around a bed. An elderly doctor, looking grave, warns them to prepare themselves emotionally, as Queen Katerina's condition is critical and could worsen at any moment. Percy cries out for her to open her eyes, his face streaked with tears as he clutches the bedsheets. The urgency is palpable as the king orders a message to be prepared immediately. They realize that they must inform Estelle of the dire situation at once, as the momentum Hazelbart had been regaining is now threatened by this sudden tragedy. The final image shows the queen lying pale and unconscious, her life hanging by a thread as the kingdom prepares for the worst. Sunlight filters through the high, vaulted arches of the demon palace as the demon king Gil stands silhouetted against a grand window. His gaze lingers on the heavy drapes, noting they remain parted further than their usual alignment. Deep in the night, he had stirred from his rest, his attention snagged by the fine layer of dust coating the window frame. Rather than returning to sleep, he spent the remaining hours of darkness meticulously cleansing the surface until the first light of dawn. Across from him, Queen Estelle observes his sleep-deprived state with a mixture of concern and growing realization. She questions if such a trivial matter truly kept him from his bed, and Gil, his expression unreadable and eyes heavy, admits to his habitual lack of rest. As they walk together through the sun-drenched corridor, their silhouettes framed by the expansive glass and intricate stonework, Estelle notes a subtle shift in their dynamic since their recent time at the training grounds. Gil dismisses his obsessive behavior as simple meticulousness when Estelle labels him a perfectionist. They traverse the polished floors of the long gallery, their shadows trailing behind them like ink. Estelle's heart lightens during these casual exchanges, though she remains tethered to the reality of her position as a bridge between two worlds. She wonders if she still exists as a mere pawn in a political deal or if something fundamental has altered within the Demon King's heart. Her smile masks the inner calculation of whether Gil considers her in the same light she considers him, even as they move toward the day's official duties. A beast-headed official greets them in the hallway, announcing that the high-level meeting will begin shortly. Lord Frodham's arrival is mentioned, signaling the start of the day's political maneuvers. Gil's countenance hardens immediately, transitioning from the quiet domesticity of the hall to the cold authority required of his station. Estelle watches the play of emotion on his face, tracing the sharp lines of his profile as his expression shifts into a mask of iron. She ponders his thoughts, wondering if she occupies any space in his mind during these moments of transition. Inside the council chamber, Gil presides over a table of monstrous advisors, including a large crocodilian demon and a horned general. A report from the reconnaissance unit lies open on the table, detailing the capture of 6 demons near the border attempting to enter human territory. The atmosphere thickens with tension as the advisors express their troubling findings, noting an increase in such incidents. The crocodilian advisor grumbles about the suspicious nature of the human territory, suggesting that the human leader, Zero, might be plotting something behind a veil of lies. They conclude that humans are inherently scheming, a sentiment that ripples through the room. The discussion shifts toward defensive measures, with one advisor suggesting harsher penalties for border crossers. Another proposes increasing the number of scouts and strengthening security to ensure no one from the human side crosses over. Gil inquires about the effectiveness of the deployed barrier magic, only to be told it remains stable with no signs of weakening. Estelle, standing at the periphery, watches the grim efficiency of the demon leadership. She expresses a desire to have attended the meeting herself, her brow furrowed as she considers the implications of their isolationist policies. As they depart the meeting, Estelle looks troubled, her gaze averted. Gil notices her distress and asks what bothers her. She admits to wondering if the constant cycle of punishments, countermeasures, and surveillance is the only way to maintain peace. She questions if racial understanding and mutual respect could exist without such aggressive barriers. Gil halts, looking back at her with a gaze that is both pitying and firm. He dismisses her hopes as mere idealism, arguing that the history of war between humans and demons is far too deep to be undone by simple words. Gil explains that the animosity between their races is not a shallow grievance but a structural reality that would require replacing the hearts of every living being to change. He maintains that living among one's own kind in one's own land is the only pragmatic way to prevent bloodshed. Estelle recoils slightly at his bluntness, but she stands her ground, arguing that she has reconsidered her views after living among the demons. She recalls the anger and hatred she once witnessed, but as a human married into the demon tribe, she believed she could bridge the divide. She begins to doubt herself, wondering if her hopes were born of conceit. Their heavy conversation is interrupted by a sudden, squelchy sound. A small, round slime named Pete bounces toward them, eventually leaping up and latching onto Gil's face. Gil's authoritative aura evaporates as he struggles with the small creature, while a Minotaur-like servant rushes over, frantically explaining that Pete stole an important message meant for the king. Gil manages to peel the slime off, revealing a scroll the creature had been carrying. The servant explains that Pete is an orphan slime that followed him from a village inspection and settled in the palace. Estelle intervenes, suggesting they cut the small creature some slack as it might have been trying to deliver the message in its own way. Gil, now holding the slime and the scroll, finds his focus shifted to the contents of the message. His expression turns grave as he reads. He informs Estelle that they must prepare for an urgent journey. When she asks where they are headed, he reveals their destination is Hazelbart, a human kingdom. Upon arriving at the human palace, the atmosphere is draped in gloom. The king of the human realm, a man with long, flowing hair and a weary face, sits dejected in a grand room. His advisor, Percy, suggests the king should rest, but the king is inconsolable. He laments his loss of strength, confidence, and dignity, feeling pathetic in the face of his current circumstances. He speaks of Queen Katerina, whose long-cherished wish was to bring peace through her own hands. He believes the peace they currently enjoy is a fragile illusion, one he no longer understands. Estelle enters the room, greeted warmly by a young, energetic boy named Clement who tries to hide his tears behind a facade of strength. Estelle ignores the formalities, asking Percy for the details of Queen Katerina's condition. Percy explains that the queen suddenly lost consciousness and collapsed during a banquet held last week to celebrate the arrival of spring. Despite summoning the most renowned healers, her condition has steadily worsened, and she remains bedridden with an unknown ailment. Clement's facade breaks as he begins to sob, his small frame shaking. He lashes out, insisting that the demons must be responsible for the queen's condition. He argues that such a target illness, affecting only the queen amidst a banquet of many, must be the result of a demonic plot. He calls the demons vulgar, savage fools, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and hatred. Estelle stands shocked by the vitriol coming from the young prince. The tension in the room peaks as a figure emerges from the shadows. Gil has been standing silently in the back, having entered the country separately to avoid drawing attention. Clement recoils in terror at the sight of the demon king, Pete the slime still clinging to Gil's shoulder. The king immediately reprimands his son for his disrespect and jumps to offer a formal apology to Gil. He explains that the boy's accusations were born of grief and lack of proof. The king turns his attention to Estelle, expressing relief at seeing her well. He admits that with Katerina in such a state, he cannot afford to take things easy. Suddenly, a frantic guard bursts into the room, gasping for breath. He announces that Queen Katerina has regained consciousness. The room is flooded with a momentary wave of hope as they rush to her side. They are able to speak with her for a brief, precious moment, and Estelle hopes for a continued recovery. Later that evening, Gil and Estelle sit in a quiet room, reflecting on the day's eventful turns. Gil observes that the day was quite taxing, but Estelle's mind is elsewhere. She asks Gil what would happen if it were truly revealed that the queen's illness was a demonic act. Gil looks away, his voice low as he calculates the fallout. He states that if the queen were killed, it would lead to an all-out war between humans and demons, a scale of conflict that no treaty could survive. Estelle looks at Gil, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She declares herself his wife and offers to carry his frustrations and sorrows along with him. The intimacy between them deepens as they share a moment of quiet vulnerability. Gil's gaze turns intense, a desperate heat flickering in his eyes as he pulls her closer. He questions her relationship with the knight who guided them, Percy, his voice tinged with a sharp possessiveness. He reminds her that she is the wife of the Demon King and is not permitted to glance at another man. Estelle is caught between hope and anxiety, wondering if his words are born of true jealousy or a calculated bargaining chip. She searches his eyes for a sign of genuine affection, wanting to believe he sees her as a woman rather than a political asset. Their private moment is shattered by a sharp knock at the door. A guard stands in the doorway, his head bowed. He apologizes for the late hour but insists he brings unfortunate news. Gil and Estelle, their clothing slightly disarrayed from their moment of intimacy, look on in shock. The guard delivers the final blow. Queen Katerina has just passed away. The brief spark of hope from earlier in the day is extinguished, replaced by a cold, looming dread. The room is suddenly swarmed by soldiers, their spears leveled at Gil. The king stands among them, his face a mask of grief-stricken rage. He reveals that poison was detected in the cup the queen drank from, and that particular poison does not exist in human lands. He explains that Percy had a skilled apothecary investigate based on a clue. Gil is immediately restrained, his arms pinned behind his back. The king looks at Estelle, asking if she understands the gravity of the situation. He expresses deep regret for ever agreeing to the treaty, and as Gil is led away into custody, the threat of an all-out war becomes an imminent reality. Estelle can only watch in horror as her husband is taken away on suspicion of murder. Estelle stands defiantly in the center of the grand royal chamber, her voice echoing against the high, vaulted ceilings as she demands the immediate release of the Demon King Gil. Her hands clench at her sides while her hair spills over the dark, intricate lace of her dress, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and desperation. Facing her, the King of Hazelbart remains seated behind a heavy desk littered with books and inkwells, his back turned to the viewer as he looms over a document. He dismisses her plea with a chilling calmness, claiming that his daughter has fallen into a state of pity, and he produces a parchment from the apothecary as proof of some dark truth. Estelle stares at the paper, her breath hitching as her mind races to find a flaw in his logic, yet the king continues his verbal assault. He stands and turns, his face etched with a grim, unsettling resolve while the sunlight filters through the massive arched windows behind him, casting long, sharp shadows across the floorboards. He speaks of the righteousness of the human heart, arguing that living among demons has caused Estelle to forget her own nature, and he declares that the unending deadlock of war must be shattered. Estelle recoils as the king's expression shifts into something unrecognizable, his eyes wide and bloodshot as he proclaims that the only path to world peace is the total extermination of the demon race. The intensity of his hatred radiates from the panel, his mouth twisted in a snarl while he argues that humanity's future remains locked away as long as demons exist. Estelle trembles, her gaze fixed on the man who was once her father, unable to reconcile his genocidal rhetoric with the man she once knew. She flees the room, her boots clicking rapidly against the stone as she seeks out Percy, the high-ranking knight and her trusted confidant. They meet in a quiet corridor where Estelle grips her chest, her face pale as she whispers that something is fundamentally wrong with the king. Percy listens with a somber expression, his brow furrowed as he tries to offer a rational explanation for the monarch's descent into madness. He reminds her that the queen, the king's beloved wife, was murdered by demons, suggesting that the grief he had bottled up for years has finally erupted into this violent obsession. Estelle looks away, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she acknowledges the tragedy of her mother's death but remains unconvinced that it justifies the slaughter of an entire species. The scene shifts to the younger Prince Clement, who marches through the palace gardens with a scowl, trying to project strength despite his small stature. A small, gelatinous slime demon named Pete follows closely behind him, its round body bouncing rhythmically on the grass. Clement whirls around and glares at the creature, shouting for it to stop following him and hurling insults at its demonic nature. He stumbles and falls, clutching his leg in pain, yet his bravado remains intact as he tells the slime to return to its homeland while he is still feeling merciful. He retreats to his mother's former chambers, a room filled with soft light and the scent of the past, and he collapses onto a bed. He pulls a thick, hand-woven blanket over his shoulders, noting that his mother made it for him because she worried about his inability to sleep. The slime demon watches from the doorway before approaching slowly, sensing the boy's hidden sorrow. To Clement's shock, the creature begins to emit soft, trilling sounds and small droplets fall from its surface as if it were weeping. Clement's eyes widen as he realizes that even a demon can feel the weight of loss, and he reaches out a trembling hand to pat the creature's head, wondering if it too has lost a mother. Back in the depths of the castle, Estelle descends into the cold, dimly lit dungeons to visit Gil, who sits silently behind heavy iron bars. She finds him bound by a powerful spell, his movements restricted by shimmering chains of magical energy that glow faintly in the gloom. She asks why he isn't resisting, why a man of his immense power would allow himself to be caged like a common animal. Gil looks up, his dark hair falling over his eyes as he calmly states that breaking out now would only escalate the tension and make things worse for everyone. Estelle's heart aches at his passivity, and she leans against the bars, her fingers brushing the cold metal as she warns him of the king's plan. She tells him that the human armies are preparing to invade demon territory with the intent to wipe them all out, and she pleads with him to escape and return to his people. Gil's expression hardens, a flicker of his true power manifesting as a dark aura that begins to swirl around his silhouette. He realizes that if humanity intends to commit genocide, he has no choice but to kill in order to protect his kind. The air in the dungeon grows heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient magic as Gil begins to shatter the binding spell. Estelle watches in awe and terror as the iron bars twist and snap under the pressure of his released energy, an explosion of shadow and light rocking the foundations of the prison. Gil stands amidst the wreckage, his presence towering and regal, yet his eyes soften when they land on Estelle. He tells her that she must stay behind in human territory, for if she follows him, she will be forced to fight her own family and her own kind. Estelle drops to her knees, her voice cracking as she insists that she is his wife and that her place is by his side, regardless of the consequences. Gil turns his back on her, his silhouette framed by the jagged hole he has blasted into the castle wall, and he begins to walk away into the night. He whispers a final wish for her to find happiness with someone else, his footsteps fading as he vanishes into the darkness, leaving Estelle alone in the ruins of the cell. Alarms blare throughout the Hazelbark capital as the news of the Demon King's escape spreads like wildfire. Percy and a group of soldiers rush toward the dungeons, their armor clanking and their torches casting flickering orange light against the stone walls. They find the prison destroyed and Estelle standing in the center of the debris, her face set in a mask of grim determination. Percy confronts her, his voice rising in disbelief as he asks if she was the one who helped the monster escape. Estelle looks him directly in the eye and confirms her actions, her resolve unshaken even as Percy recoils in shock. He shouts at her, asking if she understands the gravity of what she has done, while the soldiers around them murmur in fear and confusion. Meanwhile, the king stands on a high balcony overlooking the courtyard where thousands of soldiers have gathered, their spears and shields gleaming under the morning sun. He delivers a rousing, bloodthirsty speech, declaring that the time has come to eradicate the demon plague once and for all with human strength. Estelle watches from a distance, her gaze fixed on her father as he rallies the troops with promises of a world without conflict. She notices a strange, distant look in his eyes and hears him whispering to the air, referring to some guidance he is receiving from an unseen source. Her blood runs cold as she realizes her father is not acting of his own volition, but is being manipulated by a shadowy entity that she cannot see. She decides that she cannot remain a passive observer and retreats to her room to prepare. The next morning, Percy finds her in the courtyard, dressed for travel and carrying a sword at her hip. He tells her that the army is marching out soon and that he will be leading the forces as the supreme commander in the king's stead. Estelle tells him that she has made her own decision and will stay in the capital to do what she can for the country, though her true intentions remain hidden behind a small, sad smile. Prince Clement approaches her, clutching the slime demon Pete to his chest, his eyes filled with uncertainty. He asks Estelle what she plans to do with the sword, and she looks at the weapon, her fingers gripping the hilt as she says she wants to believe there are things only she can do to change the future. The gates of Hazelbark swing open with a heavy groan, and the massive human army begins its slow, rhythmic march toward the demon lands. The kings of Belka and Lors arrive with their own contingents, pledging their support to the cause of extermination and offering their condolences for the queen's death. Percy rides at the head of the column, his face grim as he acknowledges the allied monarchs, though he notes with concern that Prince Clement is nowhere to be found among the ranks. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, the scouts return with urgent news of demon forces spotted ahead, swarming like insects across the horizon. Percy draws his sword, the blade catching the light as he orders the army to advance without hesitation, his heart set on the total destruction of the enemy. Within a realm of high-arched windows and starlit skies, a figure contemplates the impending shock of an adversary once the full scope of his recent actions comes to light. The narrative shifts abruptly to a moment of temporal distortion, moving back slightly to the onset of war preparations within the human territory of the Hazelbark Kingdom. Simultaneously, across the border in the demon kingdom of Wilhelm, a group of diverse demonic entities, including avian humanoids and beastmen, recoil in stunned disbelief as reports of a human invasion reach their ears. Amidst the opulence of the Wilhelm castle, where bat-winged messengers flutter near the vaulted ceilings, Demon King Gil strides through a crowd of frantic retainers. He maintains a stoic countenance as he unilaterally declares their current deal cancelled, promising further explanations only after urgent military orders are carried out. His beast-like subordinates press him for information regarding the fate of the agreement and the whereabouts of Queen Estelle, who had departed in his company, yet Gil offers no comfort to his worried subjects. Gil turns away from his court, his silhouette framed by the bright light of the castle's exit. He characterizes his bond with the human queen as a mere byproduct of a formal agreement, asserting that its dissolution naturally led to their permanent separation. He posits that she has returned to a place more fitting for her status, alongside an individual more suited to her nature, though his downcast eyes and the heavy atmosphere surrounding him suggest a deeper complexity to the situation. The demon populace erupts in a cacophony of outrage, their forms trembling with indignation at the perceived betrayal by the human woman they once recognized as Queen Estelle. They view the rejection of the deal as a personal affront to the entire demon race and seize upon the human invasion as a long-awaited opportunity for revenge. In their fury, one muscular demon smashes his fist into a table, his eyes burning with a grudge held since antiquity, as they prepare to fight a battle they believe is necessary to protect their kind. In a quiet, sun-drenched room, a young boy sits huddled on an ornate bed, his face buried in his hands as he sobs over the prospect of the coming war. He trembles with the fear of death, contrasting his own perceived weakness with the unwavering resolve of his sister. As he laments his own limits, a small, gelatinous creature named Pete bounces toward him, carrying a soft blanket, a cherished keepsake from his late mother. Clutching the fabric to his tear-streaked face, the boy pleads for the courage to face the trials ahead, even as the sounds of battle begin to echo in the distance. On the dusty plains of the battlefield, the human vanguard falters as a terrifying presence emerges from the smoke. The soldiers cry out in terror as they recognize the form of Demon King Gil, a sight that contradicts everything they were led to believe. Confusion ripples through the ranks of the Hazelbart infantry. They had been told by their leadership that Prince Clement had already slain the demon sovereign. They realize with mounting dread that this confrontation, which was supposed to be a mere cleanup operation of remnants, has transformed into a lethal encounter with a legendary power. Lord Percy, the commander of the knights, stands before his men with a look of profound solemnity. He publicly denounces the behavior of King Cedric and Queen Katerina, claiming he can no longer remain silent or follow their lead. He reveals a devastating truth to the gathered soldiers. The royal family fabricated the lie of Gil's defeat simply to paint their son as a hero. Percy expresses a deep sense of shame, lamenting his failure as a captain to stop such vile deceptions, and suggests that a nation ruled by such falsehoods might be better off falling into ruin. Percy's rhetoric reaches a fever pitch as he claims that the deception perpetrated by the human monarchs could shake the foundations of the entire human realm. He speaks of his past oath to Hazelbart and his current duty as commander, vowing to take full responsibility for the lies that led them there. With a dramatic flourish, he draws his blade and steps forward to challenge Demon King Gil to single combat. While his men watch with bated breath, questioning if he even stands a chance against the Demon Lord, Percy offers them a confident smirk, instructing them to witness the moment of his victory. The two leaders clash in a whirlwind of steel, their blades ringing out across the silent battlefield. Percy maintains a conversational tone even as he strikes, taunting Gil for his relaxed demeanor and advising him to be more careful with his expressions. Gil parries the strikes with effortless grace, his movements fluid and precise. Percy's internal dialogue reveals an intense excitement as he sees the situation unfolding exactly as he envisioned, praising Gil's top-notch swordsmanship while simultaneously looking for an opening to exploit. During a brief lull in the exchange, Gil attempts to de-escalate the conflict, urging Percy to promise a retreat in exchange for the immediate withdrawal of the demon tribe. Percy merely scoffs at the proposal, choosing instead to target Gil's emotional state by mentioning Estelle. He notes with satisfaction how easily the Demon King is shaken by the mention of the Queen. Seizing the moment of Gil's hesitation, Percy lunges forward, managing to pin the Demon Lord to the ground with a blade held to his throat, his face twisting into a mask of triumphant malice. Straddling the fallen Demon King, Percy finally drops his facade of the repentant captain. He reveals his true, multifaceted objective, to kill Gil and claim the title of the hero who saved the world, thereby securing his path to marry Estelle and seize total control of the kingdom of Hazelbart. He mocks Gil's apparent jealousy and pathetic concern for the queen's happiness, asserting that even a demon is a better choice than a man as vile as himself. Percy raises his sword high for the finishing blow, his eyes wide with the proximity of his ultimate goal. In a sudden, explosive blur of motion, the tide of the duel turns. A flash of light interrupts Percy's killing stroke, and his sword is sent flying from his grip. Percy recoils in shock, his helmet tumbling away as he realizes his weapon has been neutralized. From the periphery of the battlefield, a voice rings out with icy clarity, flatly rejecting the notion of ever marrying a man like him. Queen Estelle appears on the scene, her gaze filled with contempt for the man who attempted to use her as a pawn in his play for power. Gil, now standing and unharmed, watches the scene with a knowing smirk as the unexpected arrival of the queen confirms that the entire confrontation had proceeded exactly within his calculations.